What advice do you have for non-black people who are trying to get their friends and family to understand racism, slash become anti-racist? Well, I believe the problem, that we face is that we're fed information and false information about, the community of black people. So it's a subconscious thing, usually. Sometimes it's more direct, but your parents, your family members, your friends, they grow up learning that black people have a so-called higher tendency to be criminals, or they have a higher tendency to be violent or disrespectful. So they automatically assume the whole race, is lesser in a certain sense. So what I think is important to do is to show examples of friends that you have that are extremely, normal. just show them your friends. Don't be afraid to invite them over. Tell them good stories about them. Tell them about their accomplishments, and to make sure that they know that the black people that they interact with are just as normal and human as you. And to also educate them about the systemic racism issue in this country. Black people, they've been put into areas geographically, socially, where they're designed to fail, where it's automatically harder for them to make it out of certain situations. So educate your parents about how far back racism goes. Educate them that it wasn't our choice to come to this country. Educate them that we've had to suffer such great and intense discrimination for hundreds of years. And ask them, how would they feel if they would have to go through just half of the turmoil that black people face? Ask them if they would want to be black. Ask them certain questions that would make them uncomfortable and see how they react. And then continue to educate them and educate yourselves about how it truly feels and how it truly is to be black in America. Ask your friends how they feel. Watch this video. Ask, certain people about their experiences and learn from them and acknowledge them and accept your privilege, the privilege that it is to have an equal opportunity in this country when black people and other people of color don't. How has systemic racism affected you? Based upon my experiences in school, especially as a black man, it's expected of me to become one of three things: to be a rapper, to be a basketball or football or athlete of any sort, or to be someone who isn't successful, to be in jail, to be a criminal, to be a thug, to be a gangster. Those are the three expectations that they have put on black men. And it's truly just from the system. There's so many elements that went into this connotation for black people, and it evolves into something else every decade. As soon as we stop getting looked at as criminals, we get looked at as people who are angry. It just evolves, you know what I mean? So at school, I was expected to do less work. I was expected not to perform at a high level. And I was expected not to get into college as easily as other people. And I was expected not to show up to class. I was expected not to capitalize on the opportunities I was given. So that's one way that systemic racism has affected me. And today, in the employment world, certain times, like even my name, because it's unique, I will be looked over because it's not white enough in a job application. I automatically look, ghetto. And same with other people with black names, or names in the black community. It's things like that. It's automatically assumed that I act a certain way, and therefore opportunities given to me are lesser. I didn't grow up in the whitest neighborhood. I grew up in Aurora, and that's a very diverse place. We're not the richest neighborhood in or the richest city in Colorado. I grew up in the metro area. I didn't grow up in Parker. I didn't grow up in Centennial. I didn't grow up with access to private education. And when I was in private education, I didn't like it. And because I was treated as if I didn't deserve to be there. I didn't grow up with access to great funding for our schools. I went to public school. We didn't have enough books sometimes. We didn't have enough desks or chairs sometimes. We didn't have opportunities for certain programs. We were forced into going a certain pathway. You couldn't explore media. You couldn't explore certain topics that you were interested in because we didn't have the funding. So things like that. I was automatically placed in an area that didn't have access to certain opportunities that other people might have in richer areas and more white areas. How do we break the system? I think the first thing and the first step to breaking the system is recognizing what privilege means, why people are fighting against racism, why we're still fighting against racism, and what we can expect in the future if things start to change. As soon as we start educating people on what's really happening, and the oppression that Black people still face today, the more it's recognized, the more change that comes. So the more we record our interactions with police, the more we start speaking out against the injustices in the judicial system and how we tend to get more time for the same crimes that white people commit. Once we realize that Black people in Black neighborhoods tend to get less tax support and that we were designed in certain geographic senses to fail. And we realized what weight different words carry. And we realized that, the struggles that Black people endured aren't just a joke now. It's still a real thing. And certain things like that. We start to recognize our differences as people and as cultures. And then after that, we can start taking steps like voting in office to erase and eradicate racism, fight against people who want to keep the laws that bind racism together, vote against people who are racist, put laws and funding into the government for lower income communities, into inner city areas, into places where people of color flourish. Make it more equal. That's what we need to focus on, the government. That's the next step. And then after that, we can see, hopefully an abundant amount of change, but it's going to take a lot of work. And it's not just going to be George Floyd or even any of the countless other, instances of police brutality and inequality and racism. For that to change, it's going to have to be a continuous fight. We've been fighting for hundreds of years, and racism isn't just going to be dropped after these protests end. How has George Floyd's death made you feel? Watching that video of George Floyd passing away in front of my eyes, it's sad to say, but I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised that another Black man was getting his life cut short by a man with a badge, in a blue uniform and a gold badge. I had to grow up learning how to interact with police officers if I get pulled over. I've gotten pulled over 3 times, and each time my heart dropped to my stomach, and I realized that I might not come home after this scenario. I'm not surprised because I've seen it 100 times. I've seen it 1,000,000 times, man. I've seen instances of police brutality and nothing being done about it. A protest, may come around like there was for Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Eric Gardner. There were protests for those situations, but we still have innocent Black men and unarmed Black men getting shot, getting killed, getting suffocated, and not all of them are recorded. It's sad to say, but I knew what was going to happen. It just is sad to watch it happen. And it's crazy that people finally get to see what we've known. And it's sad to say that Black people have grown numb to the constant discrimination towards our race and the violence towards our race. I was educated on how violent the police are. I was educated on lynchings that have been happening for hundreds of years. I was educated on how poorly Black people have been treated in this country. So when I watched that video, I probably didn't have the same reaction as people who don't understand racism had. How do the police make you feel? The police invoke fear, and to me, being a black man, I had to grow up like that. I remember when I first started driving, I was always scared that I'd get pulled over. I was always nervous about that. And I was always wondering, like, yo, how do I go about this the right way? That things don't go south. How do I control someone else's reactions? And it's a shame that I have to be the one to control someone else's reactions based off of how I interact with them. But it's the same thing. It stems from when I was a kid, on how to interact with people, how to make that first impression. It's something that honestly black men and black women and African Americans have to practice all the time since birth. We have to prepare for moments like this. And then when I see in the protests just them attacking people, there are some good police officers. I have family, who are in the police force. But my initial feeling, and reaction to police is sadly negative, just because of how I've seen people who look like me treated. I feel like there needs to be a defunding of the police, and if we put more funding into public transportation, or we put more funding into public schools, public education, we can create better opportunities for people to grow, and not to keep them stuck in an area where they cannot grow, or it's hard for them to grow. I acknowledge that there are officers with hearts. I've had encounters with officers, who were very respectful. But I also realize there's officers who join for the wrong reasons. So I think there needs to be a more intensive process of choosing what officers, have the ability and the right to represent this country. And we need to have more background checks. We need to have more mental tests. We need to have more guidelines for officers to follow so that they don't make mistakes. We need to have a defunding of the police to where than our actual military, and that they shouldn't have the ability to terrorize our citizens and put on their riot gear. I believe that the police shouldn't have as much funding as public education. That's ridiculous. We need to be educating our future representatives and our future workers and our future, scholars. We need to be educating the future rather than tearing down the people in the present and making it harder for them to succeed. We need to stop funding the people who are cutting lives short. How has racism/discrimination affected your self-image, personal life, and family? I was blessed to be born in a family where they raised me to carry myself with confidence. But as much encouragement you can give your child, they're still going to go out there and face scrutiny because of the color of their skin. And that's just the reality of this world, sadly. So I've had instances where, being black was a negative thing. And I've had instances where I wasn't accepted because I was black. I've had instances where I couldn't get along with people because I was black. I've had instances where I felt so secluded and, singled out because I was black. And I see that today, like in college. I was the only black person in a lecture of 50 plus people. Does that make any sense? I'm sitting alone every single day just because I'm black, and I don't understand the people around me, and they don't understand me. It's harder for me to get along with people who don't understand what my people have gone through, and they're too scared to interact with me because they already know we're different. That's what they grew up with. The people I go to college with, they've grown up with white people their whole life, or people who weren't black their whole life. Why do they have to venture out and, talk to this only black kid in the corner? That's how it was. People, who choose groups in class, they don't choose me because I look different. And it may not be like that, and they may not claim that, but that's what it is. That's the reality of it. It's because I'm different and I come from a different culture. I might talk differently than you. I might not. You don't know because you're too afraid to go over that barrier. And why do I have to be the one who makes peace with the people who, don't look like me? Why do I have to be the one who has to constantly remind white people that I'm not different from you and I'm human as well? So that's one area that I've definitely felt where, my confidence was lower, or I felt discriminated, and it's affected my self-image. Where was the first time you heard the N-word? How did you feel? First time I heard the N-word was when my dad was educating me on the civil rights movement. And the first word I heard was Negro, but the other N-word was definitely stronger. And I learned it the right way by hearing it from my parents first and knowing what it meant, the weight it carries. And it's sad to say that people who aren't black don't know what it means. They don't know how much weight it carries. And it should never be said by anyone who isn't black. Simply because you don't understand how it was used towards us and where it originated from. And that when you say that word, it automatically has a derogatory sense if you're not black. And it's sad to say that because it would have been harder for me to go to a white school. It was just ridiculous growing up and having to face scrutiny for something that I can't change and something that I don't want to change and I shouldn't have to change. So it's I feel like my sense of belonging will always be hindered by that, because there's always an expectation for how I'm going to act or who I am or what my personality is because I'm black, and that's a first impression. And not only to white people, it's to any person who's not black, because they're all fed the same information about black people. And you can't really know until you're educated or you've experienced it. So, yeah.